Um, I think the best advice I've received is from my father, and just be he's like, and just that lesson that I talked about earlier is be in tune with your body and realize when you're maybe at that tipping point where you've been working really, really, really hard, and you may need to hit the brakes before you run off the cliff. Because I feel that there's a lot of people that are like me who just love work. They just love work. They're addicted. They're addicted to working really, really hard all the time. And unfortunately, they don't see that cliff before it hits. And I think my dad that's probably what's kept me in sport for as long as I have been, and enjoying sport as long as I have been, is just being able to stop myself before I run off that cliff.
Welcome to the One World Countless Story podcast with me, Selena Novello. Today I have Isaiah Springer as our guest, and I am so thrilled to have him here today. I actually met Isaiah through his brother, Elijah, and me and Elijah were really good friends at the beginning, and then our families kind of just merged together. And so I've kind of grown up with Isaiah in my life during high school, and so I had to invite him to come on. You may have also heard Ash Springer's story. He was one that I also interviewed, which is Isaiah's dad. So you can also check out that podcast interview because it was really good. But I'm excited to have you here today. So let's start with you introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about you.
Yeah, so my name's Isaiah Springer. I was born in Calgary, Alberta, and then ended up moving to Cochrane when I was about 7 years old. I grew up in Cochrane from the ages of 7 all the way up to 17, and at 17 is when I moved to Edmonton for a rugby academy. Growing up in Cochrane, I really enjoyed the small town feel. The class sizes were really small. We had classes of usually about 20 kids, and with 20 kids that you always see every year, the friendships get really close, and you build really strong friendships there. And yeah, so growing up, I've always been big into sports since I was young. I've probably played almost all the sports on the face of the planet. My first sport was gymnastics. I started off gymnastics when I was very, very young. Did that for a couple of years, and then moved to soccer. I did a little bit of dance, a little bit of hip hop. I've done jujutsu, a little bit of that, and football, rugby, basketball, so many sports.
All of them.
Yeah. And now I am currently wrestling for the University of Alberta.
That's so awesome. So you said sports was really big in your childhood, but can you tell us a little bit more about what your family was like, and if you had any siblings, which I know you did. So just a little bit about your family life and what it was like for you growing up.
Yeah, so our family is a pretty tight-knit group. I have two brothers, Elijah and Jonah, and Elijah is the middle one, and he is a year and a half younger than me. So we were super close. We usually played all our sports together, went everywhere together. We're usually on the same teams. And then my youngest brother, Jonah, we were still super close. We would always compete, but he was a little bit younger than us, so we never got the chance to play on the same teams. But we would always play outside together, playing games. And yeah. And then my parents, Ash, who you mentioned before, he was probably the biggest driver of us playing sports. He loves sports. And he definitely supported us in everything we did. And then my mom, Anna Springer, she was also there. Probably my biggest fan. You always hear her in the crowd screaming. You always pick out her voice, so it's always nice to have her there.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And so your dad was really the driver force of you guys all being in lots of sports then.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So he played a lot of sports when he was a kid as well. He mentioned that. He was a big gymnast, played football, did track. And so he loved sports. He loved the lessons that it taught kids, and that you could bring through the rest of your life, really.
And what would you say some of those lessons are now that you're a little bit older that you've learned from your sports?
Some of the biggest ones, I think, the importance of getting up early is was probably one of the biggest ones. I
Mhm.
know that more when I'm now older. Now, for example, like I have to wake up at 5 a.m. just to make it to practice on time, and
Wow.
that's probably 3 to 4 times a week if it's either practice or morning weights.
Mhm.
And I had a little bit of exposure to that in when I was younger because usually we'd have weight trainings in high school. We'd have weight trainings in the morning, so I got accustomed to that early, which was nice. So that it wasn't as much of a shock now.
Mhm.
So yeah, so getting up early, getting your work in early, it also makes it easier. I found a couple times when I try to push workouts later in the evening, then I wouldn't enjoy it as much. It'd kind of be more sluggish, wouldn't be as focused.
Mhm.
Um, Other things, I think perseverance was a big one. I've had a lot of ups and downs in a lot of different sports,
Mhm.
especially in wrestling, rugby, and in football. I've had times where I felt the top of the world, felt like I was the best, doing my best. I've been in that game, and then there's been times where I've kind of hit, kind of not necessarily rock bottom, but pretty close, where I'm just terrible at this sport. Like, why am I still doing this?
Mhm.
So just being able to move through those valleys and get back up to really enjoying the game because I love those games and I still love those games to this day, and they bring me a lot of joy when I'm playing them. Um, so yeah, so just moving through those valleys, and
Mhm.
then I think probably the biggest lesson is just enjoying what I'm doing. Like as I said before, like getting through those valleys because those peaks when you're really enjoying the sport that you're playing, really enjoying whatever you're doing at that time, that's when life's going good and that's what you kind of live for.
Yeah, totally. And so when did you start to narrow down on the specific sports that you liked? Because it sounds like you did a lot. So what were the sports that you ended up picking maybe in your later high school career?
Yeah, so grade 11 was kind of my decision year on what path I was going to go because at that time I was playing football, rugby, and I was wrestling.
Mhm.
And three sports at a when you start trying to get to the higher levels, it doesn't really meld well very well because usually the sports are trying to demand so much of you. So at that time in grade 11, I decided um, to to move to Edmonton for a rugby academy because I believe that rugby was my number one sport at in grade 11.
Mhm.
And so Edmonton had this awesome rugby academy connected to the university, and so that academy allowed me to both focus on school as well as sports because how the academy is set up is I do classes from 8 a.m. to noon, and then I played rugby from 1 till 4. So I had that great split, and then I had the evenings to do whatever I needed out of the homework. Fortunately, the coach at in Edmonton found out that I was coming to Edmonton, and he called me and said, "Hey, you are welcome to come train with us anytime." So fortunately, that also allowed me. Now that my evenings were free, I was able to go continue my wrestling as well.
That's awesome. So you were able to continue wrestling and rugby at the same time. And so you
Yeah,
decided to leave football behind you.
yeah. Unfortunately, I wasn't as I wasn't my paths weren't really as open in football because
Mhm.
my end goal was always to be get to the go to university.
Mhm.
My end goal, that's always been my end goal, is to get to university, and I found that through rugby and wrestling, my goal those would be my pathways to get to my end goal.
Mhm. That's awesome. And tell me a little bit about your school experience. I know you mentioned a little bit, you're in a small town, small classes, but was school easy for you, hard for you? What was it?
For me, I always enjoyed school, so school it was never like a burden on me.
Mhm.
I did enjoy like learning new things is probably is one of my is what I enjoy.
Mhm.
So because I didn't it wasn't dragging on me and I kind of enjoyed it. School did come a little more naturally for me, which was nice.
Mhm.
And yeah, just putting in. I would I wouldn't say I was like naturally super gifted at school, but I did put in a lot of work so that my marks did show.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, so I did enjoy school going through. Um, junior high was well, that was a long time ago now. But junior high is when I think I realized that if as long as I keep putting in work, then my marks will be able to stay up. And then as well as I had a guidance counselor one time say, if you keep your marks up in high school, you can get money. So that was also a pretty big motivator
Yeah.
with for those scholarships. So then yeah, so I just kept that in the back of my mind, kept working at my school, and now that I'm in university and it's all basically self-driven, I feel that really having that enjoying that school aspect really helps me now because it's university self-driven, and if you don't drive yourself to get your schoolwork done, then some big penalties are gonna come your way, or some big lessons are gonna come pretty quick.
Absolutely, especially with online schooling, it's like a whole nother layer of you really have to want it. That's really interesting. So you did fairly well in school, it sounds like. And how did you balance? I mean, you said 3 sports at one time. How did you balance school and sports and all of life's things at such a young age?
Yeah, so for me, um the balance, it was a lot of work, it was a lot of time management.
Mm-hmm.
um I I always try to get my schoolwork done a little bit early. I tried not to leave things to the last second.
Mm-hmm.
And it was nice for me because I knew that because my school, I didn't have to spend as much time on my school, because I had a pretty good study habit, study schedule, so that I didn't have to spend like 3 4 hours on one subject just to pass the exam. So I was pretty lucky that way, where I could spend like 45 minutes with like direct work and understand the concept pretty well, because that opened time for me to do my other training. And then yeah, and then I think it was also important that I had a little bit of downtime. I think my dad was probably the biggest driver, because without my dad, I would have just done everything, because I'm really bad at saying no
Yeah.
to people. I'm really bad at saying no, and whenever someone gives me an opportunity to do something, I usually say yes and take it and take that opportunity.
I can
But my
relate to
dad was really good. Yeah, my dad was really good at reading my face, reading my body language, being like, "Hey, you need to take a break." Like
that. Mhm.
there's been many times where I'm like, hey, dad, we gotta go to practice. He's like, maybe not today. You're like barely walking up the stairs. You're like crawling up the stairs. Like it's time to take a break. Just refocus, reset, and then we can go back at it again. And I think it was probably because of my dad that I've been able to I was able to play as many sports as I was at a higher level, as well as not like completely fall apart.
Right. And have you been able to like maintain that where you're like, okay, my body needs a break. I'm gonna like acknowledge that, or are you kind of stuck in that like grind, 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 grind?
For my first couple of years, uh, when I moved out of the house, and my dad wasn't
Yeah.
always around, it was tough, because then I switched right back to always grind, grind, grind all
Mhm.
the time, and I did feel it. There was a couple of times where I did burn out.
Mhm.
Um, and I think I've done that like since I've been up in Edmonton. There's been probably about 3 times where I can say I've legitimately burnt out.
Mhm.
And after that third time, I'm like, okay, my dad was right growing up. Like I have to listen to him. And now I'm really happy that I'm a little more in tune with my body. And I realize that, okay, I can feel my body slipping. I can feel my body. And it's not even just my body. Sometimes it's my mind too. And when
Mhm.
I feel it starting slipping, my mind and my body start slipping, and I'm like, okay, I can take a little step back. It usually takes me, when I find that I'm in those burnout situations, it usually takes me about 5 to 7 days for me to, as long as I take the foot off, not completely off the pedal, but
Mhm.
just a little bit off the pedal, just so I can reset and then let my body heal and my mind heal, and then get back at it again.
Absolutely. And can you kind of walk us through that like last breakdown or burnout point where you were like how you got burnt out and then how you kind of came out of that? Because I know you said it took you about 7 days, but what did you do that actually helped you get out of that burnout?
Now, the last burnout actually came from, it was more from a school, because it was during COVID, and
Okay.
the COVID and university was, it was a new experience for me definitely, and especially because of my, so I'm in a math major. Well, I'm in the Bachelor of Secondary Education with a math major, so I have to take a bunch of math classes, and in the first COVID semester when it was all online, and I found it very difficult because the math classes was all self-driven. There was no scheduled lectures. There were scheduled office times, but really what you had to do is you had to watch a video, and then fill out some e-class quiz weekly,
Hmm.
um, and that was your class. And I found that really tough because I really like going to class, listening to the professor, and that's usually how I learn best.
Mhm.
So the math class did not go well the first semester.
Mhm.
And I remember that it was just that really drained me mentally because I've usually been quite successful in the classroom. So just having those that really drained me mentally. And
Mhm.
so that was sort of the start of the burnout. The because it was close, wrestling wasn't as much of a factor. So my physical was all right, but was my mental, the mental side wasn't doing as well as it usually does.
Mhm.
So then I kind of hit around November is when I probably realized, okay, now I think I've hit this point here that I gotta try and start recovering.
Mhm.
And at that point, I think what I did is I kind of took a step back, um, and I just thought of like what could I do better to help myself. So
Ooh.
for me, a lot of visualization really works well.
Okay.
I do like to meditate. I find that sometimes I'm quite an anxious person,
Mhm.
and sometimes meditation for me really helps quiet those anxieties. Um, so I found some meditation videos on YouTube, started doing those nightly. Um, yeah, and then and then for the math piece, I was like, okay, there's got to be something. I'm missing something with this math. So then I started asking for help.
Mhm.
I paid a little more attention to the videos, um, and then I saw the math. I was starting to understand math better,
Mm.
and that's when I kind of was like, okay, now I've passed that point, and now I'm getting back to myself.
Yeah, wow. You talked about so many important things. The thing that I love the most is that you ask yourself, what can I do better? And I think that's so important because I think a lot of time when we get to that burnout, where we get to that mental state where we're kind of just broken down, we're not at a good place, we kind of play that a little, we play in our mind, we kind of feel sorry for ourselves, which is completely fine to do. I think it's natural. I think it's important that we do that. But the fact that you're like, okay, what can I do better? And then you really used great strategies, and I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the visualization. But you used meditation and you asked for help and you were actively working on getting better. So I think that's awesome, and I really encourage people to like listen to what you had to say because it's so powerful to really just be like, okay, this is not working. I felt the way I needed to feel. I felt bad. Okay, so now what's next, kind of thing. So, what kind of things did you visualize when you said you used the tool of visualization?
So visualization for me, I use a lot in my sports as well. We've been taught a lot on how to use that visualization, and so because we've been taught in the sport, I try and translate that to just my regular life. And usually for our visualization, we put ourselves in a situation like we're living that situation at that point. So we're going from a first person point of view. I'm imagining what I'm seeing, what I'm smelling, if there's a taste. So I try to put myself um for visualization out of that point, I try to put myself in a spot where I was enjoying life, where I was doing good in my math, and then I try to visualize what was I doing specifically in order to do well in that class, or to be enjoying the little things in life that I was kind of missing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how I use that visualization in that point.
That's really cool. So, you were kind of looking at past experiences that were positive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Sometimes I was looking at the past, and then as well as trying to manifest, as well as some future points as well.
Mm-hmm. And so, you would say you kind of learned that through sport then?
Yes, exactly.
Oh.
In sport, what we have a really good, we're able to work with a lot of mental trainers here at the university, so it's really nice. And the visualization here is just what I like to do is you put yourself into say a match scenario, and you're
Mm.
trying to imagine who your opponent is, what the stands are like, what the smell of the room is, the taste of your mouth guard, and you're trying to visualize yourself at in that match before the match even happens.
Mm.
Um, and then and then from there you usually go over, okay, what am I doing in that match? What type of moves am I going to try and attempt? So stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's very interesting because I was like, that is a really cool skill that you learned. And I was like, where'd you learn it from? Because that's like really amazing that you were kind of able to put that in, not you learned it from sports, but put it into action in real life, which is just like mind blowing to me. I think that's so cool. And so I kind of want to talk a little bit, if we go back a little bit, you said that you moved from Cochrane, small town, to Edmonton, a little bit of a bigger town, you finished high school, right?
Yeah.
Edmonton? Yeah.
So in grade 11, in grade 11, at the end of grade 11, I was pretty I was being looked at for the Canadian national rugby team.
Mhm.
So I realized that I still needed to be training rugby. I still wanted to be doing wrestling at a high level. And at that point, I was kind of iffy on football.
Yeah.
But the opportunity, I was on a provincial team with a couple of people from Edmonton, and they went to the school where they were like, "Yeah, we only do school for 4 hours, and then we get to
Mhm.
play rugby for 4 hours." I'm like, "That is amazing."
Yeah.
And then I looked, and then at the same time, I looked at my schedule, and I had four classes. I had like English 30, social 30, math 30, 30-1, and then physics 30, all in the first semester. And I was like back to back to back classes. And I'm like, that's gonna be. I knew that was gonna be too much. Like I'd probably burn out if I was also trying to play rugby still and wrestle. Um, so I was like, okay, this might be an opportunity for me to be able to still get all my classes done.
Mhm.
Um, as well as still play rugby and wrestle, and I'm not burnt out and trying to get up at whatever 5 in the morning to go to the gym or whatever it may be. So
Okay, that's really interesting. And so you got the opportunity at the school. So what was it like for you moving out? I would say like you were definitely younger for sure than like the average kid that moves out. So what was that like for you to kind of like leave everything that you knew and went to this completely new place?
yeah, so I moved out when I was 17, which some people do, but so I was 17 when I moved out. And I was living. I had Anna Maria, your sister, was my roommate
Yeah.
up in Edmonton because she was going to university at the time. And yeah, it was quite a the first 2 weeks was quite a was quite different. It was a shock. Luckily, I knew most of the rugby players at the school, so I had a friend group there going in, which was really nice because I could
Yeah.
really support on those guys or lean on those guys. Like
Yeah.
I got rides, so I didn't have to take the bus necessarily and stuff like that. So it was really nice to have that support group already in Edmonton.
Mhm.
But yeah, just like the living things, like doing your own laundry all the time, like doing the dishes, making your own food, getting home and not having dinner ready, getting home at whatever time, 6, 7 at night, and then cooking yourself dinner. These
Yeah.
are all like things where I was just like, oh, this is kind of new. And then after dinner's done, then you have to do your homework from the day or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And it's just, I'm really glad though that I did have that opportunity and like less of a stressful moment because if I was in university, I don't even know how people in university do it because like that's got to be a quick turnaround because
Mhm.
it was nice that the school wasn't as hard and I
Mhm.
was able to learn that. But I couldn't imagine like first year university students, and yeah,
Yeah,
with that.
it's definitely a lot to learn, especially when you're coming from a home where you're used to, getting back from school and dinner being ready and you don't have to do much because you got to focus on school. So it's like you became super independent really, really quickly because you were put in that situation. What was like one of the biggest lessons you learned from like the whole moving away and transitioning?
I think probably the biggest was how to use transit. I think that was probably
Okay.
that's probably the one of the first lessons I learned because I didn't have a vehicle and I had to get places and Cochrane doesn't have a transit system, so
Yeah.
learning how to use the bus or the train to get places, I think that was kind of a big lesson pretty early on. Um, but I think just being reliant on yourself and being like very disciplined. I
Mhm.
think because I was doing so much, and I was like, this is how I'm gonna get to university, so I have to make sure my school is kept up. I
Mhm.
have to make sure if I want to play at a high level, I gotta make sure I'm doing whatever I can, to the best of my ability to ensure that I can keep staying at that high level. So just really making sure not letting myself slip and trying to keep myself to the highest standard possible.
Mhm. That's really cool. And I think that's like such an important lesson to learn in itself of just like how you kind of prioritized what was really important to you in your situation, which is very important. And I'm curious, so at that point, did you know what you wanted to do at university? Like, had you already applied to things? What was kind of like that next step after that rugby school?
So so for university, I got in through early acceptance, which was really nice. So I applied in October is when early acceptance starts,
Mhm.
and I applied at that point I knew I kind of wanted to go through the education teaching teaching area because one of my teachers from Cochrane thought I'd be pretty good at it. So I was like, okay, maybe let's give it a try. So um, the I applied to a bachelor's in secondary education, and fortunately, I got into it pretty quick using my grade 11 marks. They didn't even look at my grade 12 marks. It was just for my grade 11 marks,
Wow.
which was really nice. So, yeah, if you're listening to this in your grade 11 does matter,
Yes.
because you can get into university with your grade 11 marks.
Yeah, that's
Um,
awesome.
yeah. So then I got into school in October. So I knew I was going to go to the I knew I had a really good feeling I was going to go to the University of Alberta. Um, and yeah, and then from there on, I knew that they have a condition though, that if your average drops below a 70, you lose that early acceptance. So
Oh.
I knew that even though I was already in school, I was already accepted, I couldn't slack. I couldn't just not go to school anymore. I had to ensure that I kept those marks up.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So like you got accepted into the university and you said that you did you apply to other universities other than U of A or just U of A?
I just applied to U of A. Um, I I really liked at that point. I was there for a month. I didn't mind the city. I liked my friends that were there.
Mhm.
I loved the rugby community that was here, and the wrestling room. I found that I was able to excel in it. So I
Mhm.
knew the this was a good place for me and a place where I can grow and develop and really learn a lot of things. So I just applied here.
You knew what you wanted and you're like, this is what I'm going for. That's awesome. And you said that one time your teacher had mentioned to you that you might be a good teacher. Was that the only reason why you went into that, or was there other things that were like, I feel like I really want to do that?
Yeah, I think the other thing was I really enjoyed helping other people. I think that was probably one of the biggest things is I really enjoy helping other people like reach a potential that they may not have thought was possible or learn something new or learn a new skill or all these things. Because when I see them, I always find that there's this light that goes off in their eyes, and I usually recognize that. And when that light goes off, that's what brings me probably the most joy in the world is when I see that light go off when they learn something new.
Mhm.
And so I knew coming in when that teacher said that I was like, okay, I think I would enjoy. I'm gonna really enjoy that career path as well as
Mhm.
if I'm good at it, that makes it even better because
Yeah.
I don't really want to do something that I'm not the best at.
Yeah, absolutely. So is your goal to be a teacher then of some
So
sort?
my end goal is actually I want to so yeah so my probably my 5 year goal is to be a math teacher. But I want to go because the reason I picked the 4 year program instead of a 5 year program or doing a degree and then doing it after years because I want to go back to school to get a master's degree in education.
Mhm.
And what that'll allow me to do is to get into more administration work, so being a principal, doing stuff like that, running schools, is really what I want to try and get to and what I aspire to do.
Hmm.
And hopefully maybe when I'm a little bit older, maybe start writing some curriculum. But I think but that's very far down the road.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
really awesome. And why do you want to be like the leader of a school? Do you have like a vision of what schools can do or do better? Like, what is that motivation?
Yeah, I think for me, a little bit of it, I really want to, I've always been, I think, a little bit of a leader throughout my life. I've taken on a leadership role in many of the sports that I've done in many of my classrooms. And I think if I have that opportunity to lead a school, I think that I could just affect so many students, hopefully positively, and just that's really um what what I'm really trying to strive for. I think when I was really young, I wanted to save the world. That was my that was my thing. It was really weird as a little kid to like think that, but that was my I wanted to save the world. And I think what I try to realize is saving the world, yeah, it's cool, but it's really tough. But if I could save, not necessarily save, but if I can make the world better for individuals, I feel like that is just as good.
Yeah,
Um,
wow, that's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah. So I feel that being a principal, that's where I would be able to do that most effectively.
Yeah, you'll be able to achieve your goals. That's crazy because I know exactly what that feels like to kind of be young and feel that I want to change the world. And it's like a huge thing. And I haven't met many people that actually say that. And so I'm just like, oh my gosh, I know what you're talking about
Yeah.
so much. Cause I think like it's a really unique thing that's kind of like put in our heads.
Mhm.
And it's like it's so inspiring to hear that you're like, yeah, trying to change the world is like this huge thing. But if I can just change a couple people's lives or a school and make the most impact that I can in a positive way, that's just like so inspiring to hear and so encouraging to hear because I know a lot of people in that power position don't do that. They don't do the positive. They don't, not that they're trying to be negative, but it just doesn't end up going well. So I think that's very awesome of you. And I love that you know what you want to do and you have these feelings that are attached with it, which is super helpful when you're making decisions in what you want to do. So that's really, really cool. So in your university journey, you got a scholarship, right?
Yeah, correct.
Can you tell us about like the pressures of that, but also like how you kind of got into that?
So I was very lucky um to develop a relationship with the head coach at the university. While I was here in grade 12, he knew a little bit of me before, just because I've been wrestling since I was in grade 5, so he knew of me.
Wow.
Um, but coming to Edmonton, he got to see me a little bit more and sort of figure out who I was as a person and an athlete.
Mhm.
And thankfully, he did like me as a person because I feel like a lot of times you can be as gifted or as talented as you want in sport, but if you're not a really good person, then a lot of times, sometimes coaches look away. Just especially in that team aspect, if you're negatively impacting a team dynamic or um, often you're more of a drain on the team than you are a benefit, even if you're probably the best player around. So yeah, so I think the coach really liked me as a person, knew my work ethic, uh, was I have pretty high work ethic, so I really enjoyed that, and because of that, he was generous enough to give me a scholarship
Through wrestling, not through rugby.
through wrestling. Yeah, exactly. Rugby, unfortunately, I stopped growing, and everybody else kept growing, so I was probably about 160 pounds when everybody else was about 206, 6'4". I remember in rugby, they would always ask me like, "How tall are you?" or "What's your weight?" And I always lie. I'd always give myself an extra couple inches or extra couple pounds, because they do look at that at the highest level. So
Hmm. So you were just a little bit like shorter than everyone ultimately.
yeah, I was a little bit smaller. I was a little bit smaller, and unfortunately, my genetics won't allow me to to get to that that 6 foot 6'3" area. So, but it is what it is.
So then you ended up leaning more towards wrestling and getting a scholarship through that. So is there like a lot of like, I don't know about a lot of scholarships specifically like the type that you have, but is there like a lot of like rules around it? Like, do you feel sometimes like there's this other layer of pressures put on you, or what is your like experience with it so far?
Yeah, there's a little bit of pressure. I try not to let the pressure get to me too much because it'll if it's always going to be there when you have a scholarship. So the rule is you get your scholarship, but there's requirements you have to meet. You have to keep at least a 2.0 average, GPA average, minimum.
Mm.
As well as if you get injured while playing sport and you're no longer allowed to play the sport because of your injury, you lose your scholarship, even if you still have like 2 or 3 years left or however long you have left. So those are the biggest requirements. Yeah, you just have to for the scholarship, and I try not to look at them as more pressures, but just like I said before, like as long as I'm doing everything I can do in my power to be as successful as I can, to keep working on my school and my sport. And even I've had injuries, but as long as I'm working as hard as I can to recover those injuries and come back stronger than I was before, then I know that pressure isn't as substantial.
With the injuries, do you feel like there's like this fear around getting injured and losing your scholarship?
I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a fear, but you have to recognize that that is there. And because I do recognize that is there, I have to ensure that my recovery is on point. I'm not just going through my workouts and not letting my body recover. Gotta make sure my sleep is on point. Like I have to get 8 hours a night, or else these injuries start adding up. My nutrition I have to be eating the right food so that my body
Mhm.
to fuel my body so I can put my body through the ringer that it goes through. And because I know that there's a possibility that if my scholarship could be taken away if I have this career-ending injury, that just pushes me to ensure that all those other aspects of my training and of my life are top notch.
So I guess it's a good and a bad thing in a way because you're really mindful about taking care of yourself, which is a healthy thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome, awesome. And so, in your university career, I know you talked a little bit about it, but COVID. So, I want to talk about the effects of COVID on a university student. Did you start university in like real classes, or were you in that window where you were right into online classes?
So I started university the year of the big COVID, like when everything started. So
Mhm.
my first fall semester went normal, normal competition, normal everything. Second semester started normal. We got all the way to U Sport, which was second week of February, which was our big national tournament. And everything was normal up to that point. I ended up getting a bronze medal at the U Sport Championships.
Wow.
Um, and then I think is when we got a week after we got back from U Sport, we were training for the national championships. I was training for my junior national championship, was the under 20 national championship to be on a world team. And that's when everything got shut down. University said all classes are going online. I ended up going home because my parents wanted me back home, and all the gyms were shut down, everything. So I went from training as hard as I can. I was starting to peak for this national tournament to I'm not doing anything anymore.
So you
Well,
like
I wasn't.
did you
Well, yeah, everything was shut down. I wasn't doing anything anymore because I'm crazy and I can't just sit there.
right?
I have to be moving. I have to be doing something. Um, but yeah, I went from trying to peak for this national tournament to just nothing. So
So how are you still trying to move your body when the gyms were closed and like you said, everything was closed? So how did you still like stay in that physical state that you needed to be in?
I had to get as creative as possible. Luckily, we had a trainer that sent us programs
Okay.
A lot of body weight programs. A lot of us had I had a couple bands like those resistance bands. So I had those, using those, layering them up. I'd have like 4 or 5 resistance bands, trying to do squats or trying to presses, push-ups with the bands. I was trying to get creative, and by the end of COVID, I had this little mini makeshift. I call it the ghetto gym because I had an anvil, I had a bunch of bands, I had a medicine ball and some hurdles, and that's about it. And in the summertime, it was nice because we go to like parks and
Yeah.
stuff, do park workouts and try and stay active, try and push yourself, even though the circumstances aren't the best, but still trying to push yourself, trying to fatigue your body so that it can recover and come back stronger.
Hmm. So when you said you moved home and everything went online, did you find that that was very challenging for you, or did you just quickly pivot with it and keep working at it?
The first when they moved it to the credit, no credit, I kind of lost all motivation there. So I was just trying to get my 50% past the classes. But then in the following year, the first semester was kind of tough. Learning that because there was grades in that first semester and they were grading things. And yeah, it was tough for me. It was different from whatever I did before. Just I find when the profs, I like going to profs and listening to profs because sometimes they give you hints,
Yeah.
sometimes they tell you what to focus on more, and not having that, I kind of left me lost.
Hmm.
As well as there wasn't no like set schedule. As I mentioned before, the math classes, there was no set class. It's just
Hmm.
you watch videos whenever you feel like and make sure this stuff is done at this time.
Yeah.
So I've also found that kind of difficult to deal with.
Mm. Yeah, and I know for me, like sitting at a screen watching a video just is not the same as having a teacher. Even a teacher on like Zoom live is just so different from a video. Like I always just remember being like, what? Just
Yeah,
what did I just
yeah,
learn? So
yeah.
I definitely understand. Did you feel that the uncertainty of everything affected you in any way?
It affected me a little bit because I've always been a very goal-driven person. I always like to set goals, and that's what I'm trying to achieve. And just having all my goals, all of a sudden, I don't know when maybe my next competition will be. I don't know if I'll ever get a chance to be a national champion or get a chance to be a campus champion. So that was really tough for me because I couldn't set those goals because that's usually what I use to drive me day to day.
Mhm.
I set that goal and I know I'm going to try and do everything in my power to achieve that goal. But now that uncertainty, I couldn't set it. I couldn't set a goal.
Mhm.
So I kind of had to rethink of my goal structure, and I kind of had to move more to like just a day-to-day goal. What am I doing today to
Mhm.
get myself better? Because I can't really do have that outcome goal that I usually use to drive myself.
Mhm. And how do you set your goals like before? Because like now you're telling us that you set the daily goals, which is like really important. But how did you set your goals before? Like if you had to give a tip to someone if they're just starting to think about goals, what would you say to them?
I usually like and how unfortunately we've been taught how to set goals is we call them outcome goals and process goals. So our outcome goal, that's your big goal. That's what you want. So for example, for me, it's being a national champion or being a Canada's champion.
Mhm.
And then my process goals those are the goals, those little goals that you do every day or every week that will enable you to get to that outcome goal. So
Mhm.
I always like having that outcome goal there, just as that finish line to get to. And then those process goals are what are those stepping stones that enable me to get to that. So for me, I like how can I improve my nutrition? How can I learn to cook in a way that improves my nutrition? Process goal being my sleep and my what time am I going to bed every night and making sure how many hours am I getting every night.
Mhm.
And just little things like that, or in the gym, physically, am I pushing myself to move the max amount of weight as fast as I can, or stuff like
Mhm. That's really interesting. I really like those two different ways of seeing it what'd you say, outcome and process or what?
Yeah,
Those are
exactly.
the two. Yeah. Yeah, that's really good because I'm like, it's good to have like your main goal, but then you can't just like leave it there. You have to have like, how am I going to get to that goal? So that's really important. And I think that's awesome. And were you taught that in high school or were you taught that through sports again?
Um, so it was a sport class in high school, so both. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So
Yeah.
both.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's really interesting. Wow, that's so fascinating. And a couple more questions before we start to wrap things up. Just your mental game, I'm sure has to be so like strong in your types of sport, and you have to be very disciplined. So can you tell me a little bit about the mindset that an athlete needs to have to be successful?
I think from the biggest thing is just being we like to say gritty, and I like to use the word gritty because in sport a lot of things are going to try and knock you down, pull you down. A lot of people are going to try and knock you down, pull you down. For me personally in wrestling, I have a person standing across from me that wants to beat me up, and I'm it's my job not to let that happen.
So literally.
So literally someone's going to try and fight me, and I'm
Yeah.
trying to fight them back and end up
Yeah.
winning the match. So it's really being gritty, just realizing that the that people are gonna pull you down, things are not gonna go your way, and just being able to get through that and push through that so that you are successful.
That's so fascinating. And so would you say that you have like a greater self like love in some sort of ways because you get to a point where you trust yourself and despite what anybody says you're kind of just like, well, I know who I am kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. Like I know in sport, a lot of people like to say sometimes they like to pull you down, but for me, as long as I know that I'm doing everything in my power to be the best version of myself, I'm not letting myself slack off
Mhm.
or or I'm just trying to push myself each and every day. I believe that's where my confidence derives from. That's where it comes from. Whatever other people may say, I know that in my heart, I've been working hard. I've been pushing myself, and I take pride in that.
Mhm.
And yeah, that usually keeps me pretty stable.
That's so awesome. Okay, so my final question before we get into the four, my question is, can you tell us the worst injury you've had in your sports? And then I also want to hear about your greatest highlight from your sports career so far.
Okay. So my biggest injury actually happened in my first year university. So I was there for all grade 12 in Edmonton, and then I was like, okay, I finally made it to university. I got accepted. I'm in classes, and it's time to make some noise. And a month into training, we had our preseason training. Um, I dislocated my elbow in
Ooh.
practice. Um, and I went to the hospital that night. I was there for probably 6 to 8 hours overnight.
Wow.
I had doctors coming in and out. And I remember that one doctor came in. He said, "Hey, buddy, you might be out for a year. You might not be able to wrestle for a year."
Oh
And
no.
at that moment, my heart just dropped.
Yeah.
I was like, "This is crazy. Like, I just got, I just got to
Yeah.
university, and now you're telling me I might be out for a year." And I was very sad. I ended up starting crying, and I don't cry like ever, but
Yeah.
I was like, tears were running, and but then throughout the night, they did some MRIs, some X-rays, and another doctor came in and was like, "Okay, no, it's not great. It's not looking good, but I think you can probably 3 months." And I was like, "Okay, 3 months. That takes us to about December. I can still have half a season, and uh, and I should be good." I was like, "Okay, that's a little better." So I was a little bit happier. Fortunately for me, um, I was really I really took the physio and getting back healthy as seriously as I could. And luckily for me, I was back in a month and a half. So I took that healing
Oh,
time of 3 months, cut it in half, and I was able to compete one more time in the first semester before we left
so that
for
was just by
Christmas.
doing physio.
Yeah, physio. Yeah, there was a lot. It was mostly working with my physio, or with the university's physio. They have some cool tools. They have a game ready, which is like a compression cold sleeve that you can put
Okay.
on different joints, and that really helps.
Oh,
And then just making sure I was doing whatever I could, making sure my sleep was good so that my body could recover, my
yeah.
food was good so that the nutrients could go to fixing my arm. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. That is like crazy news to hear. Like, oh yeah, you could be out for a year and you're like, I just got to where I wanted
Yeah.
to go. That's
Yeah.
awful. Okay, well, that sucks, but I mean, it's good that you healed pretty fast from that. I know you've had a couple injuries before, and I remember sometimes seeing you and your face is all like beaten up, and I'm like, oh, what did you do? So I was really curious, like what you would classify as your worst, but that I feel like that classifies as probably a
Yeah.
pretty big one. Okay, so then the last question before the final four is the best highlight of your sporting career so far.
I think the best highlight of my sport career was my bronze medal match in my first year in that U sport. Just because what happened. So I was down 8 points. So I was down 8-0 in the first round, which is in wrestling, if you get a spread of 10 points, you lose the match. They call that a tech. And so so I was down 8-0 in the first round, and I ended up scoring one takedown, which was 2 points. So the first round ended 8-2. And I went back to the corner, and the coach in the corner was like, "This guy getting tired. Like start pushing the pace. Like you can break this guy." So I went back out, and then when he put his hands on me, I could feel that he didn't have that same energy that he did in the first round. So I was like, "Okay, this is my opportunity here." And so the round went on. I ended up taking him down. And by the end of the match, I ended up teching him. Instead of being teched, I ended up teching him 21-11. So it was like 32 points. Like most matches at a high level, the max amount of points that I scored are probably 8 between the two partners. But in our match, there was 32 points. It was crazy. It was a crazy match. So yeah, I think that was probably my biggest highlight in my sporting career.
Yeah, that was like take back. And then so you ended up winning the bronze medal at that whole tournament?
At that, yeah, the U Sport, so the national championship for university.
Wow, that's awesome. That's so awesome. Okay, well, let's go into the final four questions. So far, talking to you has been super easy, super amazing. And just like the way that your mind works and that you're expressing the things that have happened to you is just so awesome. So I'm excited to hear your answers to these ones. The first question is, what is the best piece of advice you've received and from whom?
Um, I think the best advice I've received is is from my father, and just be he's like, and just that lesson that I talked about earlier is be in tune with your body and
Mhm.
realize when you're maybe at that point, that tipping point where you've been working really 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 hard, and you
Mhm.
may need to hit the brakes before you run off the cliff. Um, because I feel that there's a lot of people that are like me who just love work. They just love work. They're addicted. They're addicted to working really really hard all the time, and unfortunately, they don't see that cliff before it hits. And I think my dad that's probably what's kept me in sport for as long as I have been and enjoying sport as long as I have been, is just being able to stop myself before I run over that cliff.
Yeah, that's a very, very important piece of advice. And I like the way you explain it with like running off the cliff, because that's exactly what happens right down. So yeah, that's awesome way that you worded that. The next question is, what is the worst advice you've received?
Ooh, the worst advice I've received. Oh, oh, this is a tough one.
Tricky one. Everyone struggles with this question.
Yeah, I don't know. That's tough because I usually like to take people's advice, and I usually like to tweak it a little bit so it fits me.
Yeah.
I think for me it was probably. Oh yes, now I remember. Okay, good
Okay.
story here. In school, uh, guidance counselor. Because it was a small school, not a lot of people. And it was back in Cochrane. Not a lot of people got scholarships,
Mhm.
and the guidance counselor was like, make sure your school is up to date because you probably won't. There's not a, she was basically saying it's probably you're not likely to get a university scholarship to go play sports. So make sure your classes are good. And that from that moment on, I was like, no, I'm here to prove you wrong. Like,
Yes.
watch me go. Let's watch me get a university scholarship. And fortunately, I did do that, so I did prove you wrong. But yeah, I think it was just like for her, you needed that plan B, and
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, it's okay to have a plan B, but don't rely on the plan B.
Mm.
Plan A should be your number one thing, and you should be doing everything in your power to ensure plan A is a success.
Mhm. I love that. And I agree that like there's so many people in the high school area that give you advice that's like, make sure you cover all your bases and make sure you have everything. And then sometimes there's those teachers that say things and you're like, I'm gonna prove you wrong. I'm
Yeah.
gonna prove you wrong. I know exactly what's that like. What's that? What's that? Ugh. My gosh, words. What that is like. There we go. So yeah, that's a really awesome answer to that question. Okay, the next one is what piece of advice would you tell your younger self or someone in the younger generation?
Um, what I like to tell is a couple of things. I think they kind of go in tandem. Is don't be afraid to fail and push yourself. Push yourself. Um, and but push yourself to a point that not so you don't run off that cliff. Like,
Yeah.
keep drive. Like, it's for me, it's a lot of internal drive. Figure out what drives you inside so that you don't need those outside voices telling you to keep going. Find something that you love that pushes you, pushes you to be the best version of yourself. And at the same time, while you're trying to push to be the best version of yourself, don't worry about if you may not get there or if you may fail. So those two big things.
That's very important. And I think it's said a lot, but it's very important that failure is part of it and you learn and grow. So failure is never a waste of time also. So that's very important as well. All right. The last question, we end every interview in a state of gratitude. So what are you grateful for?
For me, I'm grateful for my family, my coaches, my girlfriend, and having a roof over my head,
Mhm.
having food to eat, having friends to laugh with,
Mhm.
and having the opportunity to educate myself and learn every day. And yeah.
Awesome. I love that. So if someone wants to get in touch with you, where are they going to find you?
Oh, you can follow me on Instagram at I underscore Springer.
I'll put it below
Um,
as well so they can
yeah.
get that. Yeah.
On there, I'm on Facebook as Isaiah Springer. Um, and yeah, if you want to keep up to if you really want to get really personal, you can probably Google University of Alberta Wrestling. I'll probably show up somewhere. So
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Isaiah, for taking time out of your day to share your journey through sports and through school and what your life has been like. You really gave us so many tangible pieces of advice and with your goal setting and with mindset and how to get out of a burnout. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that.